Welcome to the Aural Apothecary podcast, authentic chat about medicines, pharmacy and healthcare in the UK.
Pharmacists Jamie, Gimmo and STC take on topical and controversial stories, but keep it edgy yet light-hearted.
Podcasts share their career-defining drug, song and book, and also share their joyful patient stories. Welcome to the Aural Apothecary podcast. My name is Jamie Hayes. For this episode, we're joined by Professor Debi Bhattacharya. Debi is Professor of Behavioural Medicine at the University of Leicester and a primary care pharmacist too. Debi is on a mission to support NHS practitioners as they look to apply behavioural science to the medicines agenda. We'll welcome Debi in a moment as she shares a drug for the Aural Apothecary Formulary, her career anthem, and recommends a book for our library. Our micro discussion this week looks at two recently published decision aids. One for people who've been told they have atrial fibrillation and are still experiencing symptoms despite treatment, and the other for those making decisions about knee osteoarthritis. That's a lot of us, I'm guessing. But first, let me welcome my two fellow apothecaries. STC is in Bournemouth and Gimmo is in Cardiff. Welcome both.
Evening.
Oh, evening.
You fell asleep there.
No, I think I might have lost connection.
Little absent seizure, no?
No, not this evening.
Listen, I'll kick off. I was just going to say, well, first of all, congratulations to the England's women's team in football. Since we last spoke, they won the Euros, so that was pretty good. Also, since we last spoke, me and Jamie got to work together again at last, which was nice. It was an event centred around community-acquired pressure ulcers, so this was the first time I've seen Jamie in action for a few years, and you'd be glad to hear that he hasn't lost it.
I thought you were going to say he hasn't changed.
Oh, did you get him to peel an orange while you were there?
No, he was good. He was really good. But even better, were the three district nurses who spoke about their experiences on the front line. They sort of spoke about their ward being the patient's front room and what that actually means in terms of the treatment we offer and the data we collect. So actually, for someone like me who's been stuck in an office or at home for the last year and then more recently in a sort of more controlled environment of a hospital, it was powerful stuff to remind us of what it's like working in people's homes and on the front line. So yeah, really, really good stuff.
It was. They were excellent, and they described meeting the chaos of people's lives, which we've talked about on the podcast a lot.
What about you, Steve?
Well, you set me off on the Malcolm Gladwell story.
All right. Yeah.
Remember we talked about, it was Waz that brought up the idea of the book, The Tipping Point.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned that there was a podcast called Revisionist History.
Yeah.
So there's something like 7 seasons. So I've gone quite long and deep into some of the podcasts. They're really good. I really like him. As you said, he's actually a journalist. He was born in Fareham in Hampshire, then moved to Canada, and then worked as a,
You go blank.
He worked as a journalist, didn't he, on the Washington Post? Okay. So yeah, fascinating stuff. Really curious, I suppose, is the right word to describe him. And I'm really enjoying the Revisionist History podcasts. Great stuff on there. And also, I have enjoyed Rory Stewart. You know, we've talked about the Rest is Politics podcast, but he had a program on Radio 4 called A Long History of Argument from Socrates to Social Media.
Yeah.
Anybody else listen to that? It was really good. Talking about the lost art of rhetoric or persuasion and the need for argument. And it was really a really, really, really good listen. And we're going to talk a lot, I think, with Debi about how we're COD psychologists, aren't we? We know nothing. We think we do, but we don't at all. And of course, I knew what the word ethos was, but I didn't actually know there's this 3 triangle of things around how to persuade. And it's ethos, pathos, and logos. And I actually never heard of logos, but it's logic. Pathos is feelings and emotions, and ethos is ethics and credibility. So those are the 3 things that you need to persuade. So jog on.
I'm off to Lagos on my holidays.
Hang on, is that in Portugal or Africa?
Very good, very good. So the Malcolm Gladwell, I had a WhatsApp forwarded to me from Jonathan Underhill this week saying, listen to this, and it was more on oxycodone. It was Malcolm Gladwell talking to Sydney Wolfe, one of the patient advocates in the US and long-time critic of the big pharma, and that episode was great. It was a bit more on oxycodone. So if you've watched Dopesick, you will thoroughly enjoy listening to that episode because it adds to the story. Okay, to follow up on our success in Belgium, we're now welcoming new listeners in Iraq and India. So wherever you're listening, the UK, Canada, New Zealand, Belgium, Portugal, and now Iraq and India, thank you for taking the time to listen, and thank you for your continued support. Look, I spotted this email the other day, and it made me buy a book. But have a listen to this now. And as we build up for two significant events, we've got the WHO Patient Safety Day on September the 17th, fastly approaching. And we've got the Aural Apothecary Live, November the 11th, at the conference of the Royal Pharmaceutical Society as well. I spotted this email from the WHO Patient Safety email group. And I'm quoting. It said, "I just wanted to bring your attention to a new book on just culture that outlines the story of my mother's death from a medication mix-up. It has just been released, and I think it has some great learnings for organisations." So I went out and bought the book. It's from Canada. The book is called Fatal Solution, and it's a fatal solution, how a healthcare system used tragedy to transform itself and redefine just culture. I've just started reading it. It's about a medication mix-up from 2004, 2005. The book has only just come out. And the lady that was writing that email was indeed one of the daughters of the lady that sadly passed away. And it was a mix-up between potassium chloride and sodium chloride in a renal replacement therapy on an ICU in Calgary.
Oh, question. Which former guest on the Aural Apothecary picked slow potassium or slow sodium as their desert island drug?
It's recent.
It is recent.
I can't remember.
She's from the Principality.
Delith,
James. There you go. So sorry I interjected, but I remember I saying at the time, oh yeah, that's still happening.
Yeah, but the short bit I've read already, it's a cracking read. So it's come over from Canada, I'm guessing, so it's taken 3 weeks to get here. And yeah, I'm sure we'll talk more about it as more and more people read it. Okay, let's welcome our guest. It's our great pleasure to welcome Professor Debi Bhattacharya to the Aural Apothecary. Debi's a Professor of Behavioural Medicine at the University of Leicester. Her full bio is available in the show notes. Look, the two key strands of her work are medication adherence and deprescribing. She's the lead researcher on the CHARMA trial, an England-wide study to test a hospital deprescribing intervention, and she's currently developing a training and mentoring programme for NHS practitioners to equip them with the skills and confidence to apply behavioural science to their medicines optimization challenges. Welcome, Debi. Thanks for being so patient on the call. What's number one, Debi, on your list at the moment that you'd like to share with the Aural Apothecary listener?
Number one. So this is a system level change that I'm trying to implement. And I have to say, so far out of my comfort zone. Having been through, development of many interventions, trials, feel very safe doing that. And now we're actually doing stuff in the real world. It's terrifying, I have to say.
Academics in the real world.
So yeah, we're implementing a system-wide opioid deprescribing strategy. So this has been a really slow burn. We developed this system level change years ago, probably about 5-6 years ago. And the methodologically, the stuff we did was a bit weird, which meant it took me forever to get someone to actually accept it to be published, because people just didn't get what we were doing. Now it's obviously mainstream and it's all fine, but back then people were like, what the heck is she doing? So because we were mashing behaviour change with realist stuff. And it was like, so the realist people didn't like the behaviour change stuff, and the behaviour change people didn't like the realist stuff. And it was like, Anyway, so we finally got that published. And then we're actually knee deep in implementation now. So we started in autumn last year. And it has been a slow burn, just trying to get, COVID didn't help, trying to get all, go on, sorry, you're waving at me.
Yeah, no, my hand's in the air. What's the system? When you say system-wide, what system are you actually talking about?
So this is like before ICS as well, but way before ICS, we said, if you're going to make changes, if you want to deal with opioid overprescribing, there's no point in just doing stuff in primary care, no point in doing stuff in secondary care. You can't just address mental health trusts. You're going to have to do the whole shebang. You need to get community pharmacy on board. So it was that whole thing that we said we needed to do.
And for our international listeners, Debi, ICS?
Integrated care system.
Correct. Well done.
Thank you.
And I'm guessing you're doing it on a geographical sort of locality, but that sounds fantastic. That sort of whole overarching system approach, is the stuff we've talked about. I'm guessing are you talking about opioid deprescribing in people with chronic pain?
Yeah, chronic non-cancer pain. But it's just simple. Well, no, it's not simple, but trying to get the right people in the room. And there was I tell you what was terrifying for me is just getting together the, what they call the pain clinics. The pain clinics. Yeah. So the pain clinics in one region have each of them operating completely different ways. And so you would expect at least them to be on the same page. They're not on the same page. Of course, the hospitals are on a different page, different priorities. Community, primary care, different priorities. So getting all of those people. So the first few sessions were basically just crowd control, trying to get people to get vent. And then right now we can start problem solving and working out a pathway that's going to fit everyone.
So have you got them to work together then? Because that's a major achievement in itself.
They are.
Wow.
Yeah, really built relationships. They're working together to a common goal. And that's one of the things that you have to have in this toolkit. You all have to have a common goal and you have to say this is an organisational priority, because otherwise it's just white noise. As practitioners, it's like we're constantly said, do this, do that, new guidelines. And like, what is it you want me to do? And so if you want people to make a change, you have to be very clear.
Have you got patients involved in this as well, in the
Yes.
design?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so the co-design is we have various task and finish groups. Ideally, every task and finish group would have had some patient representation. I think that was initially what we thought. But then, given the crowd control, given that, we really wanted open, honest conversation, we said in those early stages, we needed to create a safe place for the practitioners to be able to do that. So initially, that's how we did it. So some of the task and finish groups are practitioner only. And then we're now mixing in patients. So now we've kind of got some of the argy-bargy, we've got that all out in the open. Now we're all working towards problem solving, and the patients are involved in every task and finish group, so that we're co-producing.
So Debbie, we had a pharmacy practitioner called Tracy Brown from Scotland who runs pain clinics, and she was fascinating, and we had a whole episode really about it. But she and others have pointed out quite rightly that there's a difference between pain management and analgesic deprescribing, and you mustn't mix the two up. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. So from a system perspective, one of the measures will be, have we managed to reduce the opioids that are prescribed in this region? What we also want are patient-orientated outcomes. And so the patients, the carers that we're working with, they're helping us design a whole package of stuff. So really, this is about practitioner behaviour change rather than patient behaviour change. So a lot of the work that's already out there is how can we support patients to self-manage, how can we support them to do various other things. But it's a partnership. The prescribing or deprescribing process is a partnership. So if we just support patients and leave the practitioner out of the loop, then it's still not going to happen. So we are drawing on all of the patient stuff that will be embedded in, but the system-wide change is to support practitioners to engage with what we're asking them to do, what the guidance says. So part of that is resistance from patients. So we know that when patients are unclear about what the pathway is, what's a reasonable expectation in terms of pain management, what's this going to be like for me once I start to taper? What could I expect from that experience? If they don't know that, it all becomes really unpleasant. It's a nasty surprise. But if they go in with their eyes wide open, then they're much more likely to then follow it through and work collaboratively. So that's the only thing that's kind of directly around supporting the patient, because it helps the practitioner when they're on the same page. Everything else about the intervention, the system-wide change, is about facilitating the practitioner to do what they need to do. Things like giving them training in CBT, things like looking at the whole system and looking at how much capacity we have for referrals. So sticking someone on a pain clinic referral wait list, if they're on the wait list for months and months, that's just pointless. That's no use for anyone. So what we're looking to do is see, right, how much capacity do we have within our region? If we have lots of capacity, and that's fine, then your threshold for referral can be quite low. If we have actually quite limited capacity, then practitioners in community, in primary care, we need to upskill you so you can deal with slightly more complex situations. So they told us, they said, we're terrified. We've got these 10-minute consultations. And if we open that can of worms, we don't then know how to safely put the lid on. And then what do? And we feel like we can't support them on that tapering journey, and we feel like we're failing our own patients. So this is why this is all about practitioner behaviour change, to give them the confidence, to give them the resources that they need to be a strong partner in the process.
Oh, sounds fascinating. Over what period of time is this running then? Because it feels like you're going to need to do it over quite a while.
So we start in the autumn trying to get this up and going. I reckon it will take us 12 months to actually get it up and go. Maybe a little less. I'd like to get it. I was going to say a bit longer.
I don't think that's an unreasonable amount of time, given what you've.
I was going to say 2 years.
Yeah, once we've got it in, then we need to be monitoring it. But the problem is, we've got NHS E&I on our tail, so there's now a national edict that all ICS will be doing this, and they've said. So obviously we've got the research that's underpinning it, but they said, prove to us this works, and then we will ask ICS across the country till we're doing it. But at the moment, you don't have the evidence that this works. So we're going to ask everyone else to just do what they think. So as of 1st of April, every ICS is doing some random stuff. And then once, hopefully, we produce the evidence that this actually works, then NHS and I will adopt it. So that's why we're really trying to get this moving quickly.
It sounds amazing. I mean, what you're describing as well as if it works is perhaps a model for how we should be looking at all chronic conditions management. Identifying the capacity in a system, sharing it through the system much better, upskilling people so they can deal with it without referral. But to come back to the practitioner behaviour change, so that's something we've touched on, and sort of worded wrongly, you could see how that might get people's backs up. When you're talking about changing practitioners' behaviour, what sort of tools are you using, or what do you actually mean?
I'm trying to think, what did we call it? Because there's another, we've been through the semantics, and in another project we called equipping practitioners with the tools that they need to deliver what's asked of them, is what we've called it in one project. And this is about enabling, it's about supporting and enablement. I think enablement is the right word, is probably the best word for what we're doing.
10-minute job could take an hour without the right tools.
That's a famous saying, that is.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a toolkit. Just what you said about referral is spot on around pain referral, because if you asked a lot of clinicians that I work with, they'd say the same thing, and they sort of get a bit uppity about it because it just takes so long and they don't know what to do in the interim. What I've been intending to do in the interim is refer these people into the health coaches as the part of the social prescribers, and that's worked really well, actually. So they're almost a bridge until they get to the expert pain part, because the health coach is able to help them with the idea that I always say to people, what you want is for me to give you light switch therapy, where I flick the switch and I take the pain away. I'd love to be able to do that, but it doesn't exist. And so I've got to help you to deal with living with daily chronic pain. And so the health coaches, we find, are a good bridge to the pain service.
Yeah. Social prescribing team are all involved. And again, looking at them and what capacity they have, what level of complexity they're willing to deal with. We're mapping all of that out. But the thing is, this will be different for every region. So it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. As you said, Gimel, I think that it could be if we make this work, it could be a really good model for any long-term condition. And getting every ICS to map, what do you have? what can you actually deliver? And if you can't deliver this, then you need to upskill where you have got the capacity.
Just along those lines, STC, look, I know, and I think you've had on the Prescript webinars, Emma Davis, I went to a masterclass by Emma a few weeks ago where the use of language was so critical to this subject. And yeah, Emma just delivered something that was, I just sat there at the back thinking, wow.
Yeah, I agree. She's very, very good at that.
Future guest?
Yeah. Well, that supply and demand model, it sounds so simple. I mean, I listen to a lot of podcasts by economists and people like that, and it's supply and demand. So I'm doing the same thing with structured medication reviews and how many I'm expected to do for 40,000 patients in my population. But I've only got X number of sessions of pharmacists to deliver it, and they take half an hour each. So this is how many we've got, and this is what we've got to do. There's a mismatch. So then we have to decide how to stratify the people so that we get the ones that we think we'll get the most from. And so it's simple, really. It's just the fact that when you scale it up, it's actually very complicated.
And getting people to talk candidly about what they can. Because, of course, every element of the system is saying, oh, no, we can't do any more. We can't do any more. So it's getting them to candidly say, actually, we probably could do a little bit more of this. And it's all about working within the existing budget. There are no new funds. How can we make the money work harder for us? Wow.
No wonder NHSE and I are all over you.
No more funds.
Joking apart, of course, policy needs to be driven by research, doesn't it? I remember Professor Peter Noyce, God bless him, he's dead now, but he used to say to me about, policy people are just desperate to get the research done, but you mustn't rush it. If it's a good piece of research, they're going to have to wait, basically.
It's great. It is, and it was the NHS that funded this research originally, so it would be great to be able to actually, see that implemented.
Excellent.
Well, maybe that's one for us to follow, isn't it? And we'll pick it up in a future pod, see how it goes.
We will. We'll definitely put some. Well, if it's possible to put anything in the show notes that relates to it, Debbie, then we'd ask if you could give that to us, and the listeners might be able to go for that.
That would be brilliant. Yeah.
The Aural Apothecary is sponsored by Jamie Hayes Executive Coaching and OneLessPill.com.
Okay. Well, Debbie, it's a great start. I'm sure you're aware that one of the pleasures of coming onto the Aural Apothecary is to give a number of things for the Aural Apothecary listeners. And the first thing, we're currently going through a process of finding a new name for the feature. Tonight, I'm going to call it a marooned medicine, suggested by Laura Angus, which I really quite like. But it's this idea that you pick a medicine or a drug that's got a powerful emotion for you. So what would you like to offer for the Aural Apothecary formulary?
So mine would be the loop diuretic furosemide. I hope nobody's picked this already.
No, nobody has.
Okay.
And why?
Why? So as an early career pharmacist, doing my PhD, the first part of my PhD was to get a better understanding of why people don't adhere, why don't they take their medicines as prescribed. So what I did is over a period, it felt like an eternity, where I was doing ward rounds. And I remember having to get up it was like almost every Sunday evening there'd be tears, because I knew I had to get up on that Monday morning at like 5 o'clock in the morning to drive to York District Hospital to start recruiting my patients and go on the ward round. And so what I was doing, I was recruiting older people whilst they were on the ward, and I would visit them a couple of weeks post-discharge and then talk to them about their medicines. I'd do a pill count, and I was looking to see what's going on with non-adherence, what's driving the behaviour. Although I wouldn't have used that type of language in those times, because the evidence at the time was older people are confused, they're forgetful, and that's why they don't take their medicines. And what I found in this project, and this was funded by the what were they called then? RPSGB.
Royal Pharmaceutical Society.
The Royal Pharmaceutical. Is that what they were called then?
Royal Pharmaceutical Society of Great Britain.
Yeah, RPSGB. Yes, Royal Pharmaceutical Society of Great Britain. So what I found, that 40% of older people, frail older people, are intentionally non-adherent. And, that's kind of well recognised now. But this was back in the late 90s, when there really was that stereotype of older people being these befuddled, and that's why they weren't taking their medicines. And the main actor in these conversations that I had with the people when I visited them in their homes was furosemide. So they were telling me about how they used to miss it out when they went out for the day. So they were going on the bus, they were going into the city, so they'd miss out their furosemide and just take it the next day, not a problem. Now, since their hospital admission, the hospital team, the pharmacy team, have now started them on this box, and they can't tell which one is the furosemide. So what do? The days that they go out to the city?
Miss everything.
Yeah, exactly. They can't. We've got a bunch of white pills in the compartment. They take nothing. So furosemide, those stories were really what brought me here. I set out thinking I just need to work out how to tell people to take their medicines. Well, you just need to say it more often and loudly, and then they'll do it.
Like speaking English in France.
That's it. That was very much what now it's embarrassing that I thought that. But that's what then set me on this path of behaviour change and really understanding what drives behaviour.
Can I just say, it's so obvious that you've got a psychology background because you used the word actor. We were talking in the last episode about the highbrow micro discussion paper that we were reading and all the words that they used, but you used the word actor when you said, so the thing that what it was the furosemide tablet. So, but
that's an incredible figure, isn't it? 40%. I mean, who did we talk to this about not taking drugs? It might have been Jonathan Underhill, I don't know, but it's this. There's still an assumption, isn't it, that when we look at why treatment isn't working, we're sort of basing it on that assumption that people are taking it as it's prescribed. And we sort of know they might not be taking it or they might not be taking it twice a day, but we don't pay it the attention it deserves still on a day-to-day basis, I don't think. Do we? 40%, that's crazy.
It is. And to be honest, the 40% is still an underestimate, because even where there are unintentional factors, like someone is a bit confused or forgetful, or they have trouble accessing the medication from the packaging, there will often be an intentional element as well. Because if we really want to do something, we flipping well will, and I've seen people where, when I visit them in their homes, and they've shown me the techniques they use, and they've got the door and they will ram their medicine bottles in the door and close the door to get the lid off. And people really want to do something, they'll do it. So when we see non-adherence and people are saying, it's too tricky, I can't do this, can't fit it in the day, etc., there is often an intentional element there.
And it's that intentionality that we perhaps don't understand as well, isn't it? Because is it the famous figure, 50% don't take their medicines as prescribed? I've always thought of that as they don't take it because they don't understand it, or they've deliberately not taken them.
I think furosemide is a classic case, though, in relation to intentional non-adherence, isn't it? Because it really works. So you do get the effect. And so it's incredibly common for people to say that they don't take it when they go up the city on the bus, or they got to take 3 buses. But still, as Jamie said at the beginning, you learnt by going in people's houses, you actually see the real patient, don't you, as opposed to the one that you think that you're dealing with.
Yeah, you're right. It's going into someone else's home, seeing them in their own comfortable environment. Also, I could always spot which chair they normally sat in, because it was the one with a sprinkling of tablets all around the chair and the carpet.
Oh, I'm glad you said that. I thought you were going to say something else about too much use of diuretics then.
Right. No.
Okay, right. I'm going to move us on. That's great. Good choice. So furosemide can definitely go into the Aural Apothecary formulary. So the second thing that you get to give the Aural Apothecary is something for the Spotify Aural Apothecary playlist. So what would you pick as your career anthem?
Oh, I think this is a bit embarrassing, actually. But I couldn't not.
Go for truth.
So it's Kenny Loggins. Highway to the Danger Zone.
Yes.
Highway to Danger.
I love it.
I am such an adrenaline junkie. Yeah, so this is the soundtrack of Top Gun, and it was released when I still aspired to be a fighter pilot. This is what I wanted to do with my life. So being female, 5 foot, Asian, it was completely unattainable. But that was what I wanted to do.
That's a great song.
Is it used in the new film?
It is. Have you seen it, Debbie? It's fab.
Yeah, of course I've seen it.
10 times.
Have you given up on that dream, or are you still going for it?
I still want to be a pilot, but do you know what's really hard? It's the number of hours, flight hours
And
you
the
need.
cost.
Oh, and the cost, of course, yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to do it. One day, when I retire, I'm going to do it.
Straight in there. Kenny Loggins, Highway to Danger.
The highway to the danger zone.
Highway to the Danger Zone. Right,
Yeah.
see.
It's on my running list.
Oh, is it?
Oh, there you go. It's going to sound good on the Spotify Aural Apothecary playlist, right next to Waz's Ode to Joy.
Yeah, I thought, should I be putting something very, intellectual
No,
in?
honesty,
And I'm
we're
like,
after, Debbie. Honesty.
Jamie's was Richard Clayderman, so don't worry about it.
yeah, okay.
Don't let the truth get in the way of a good story, eh, Gibbo?
Exactly right. Actually, Debbie, you'd quite like Jamie's song, actually, I think. Do you want to give us a little twinkle on it, Jamie?
What, Sweet Child of Mine is my anthem.
Oh, I approve.
There you go. Right, okay, the last thing is for the Aural Apothecary Library. And what book would you like to recommend to the listener?
So I love all of the Agatha Christie's, but it would have to be the Miss Marple series. That's the one for me. I love the setting, that idyll of St Mary Mead. I get it's a murder mystery, but it actually really takes me to a happy place because I was brought up in the Midlands, and it wasn't particularly rural, and then I moved up to Bradford, and so I lived in a gorgeous place, World Heritage Site at the foot of the Dales, but it still had that sort of Kate Bush, and it had that, what's it called, and that's what I didn't want. I love it's that English idyllic village that I was looking for, rather than the Heathcliff and that sort of
rough and ready,
rough and ready thing that Bradford gave me, which was amazing. The Dales were stunning, but it was only when I moved to Norfolk that I really got that gorgeous, picturesque village that I now live in. We've got no street lighting, no main sewerage, no gas. I have got a fabulous pub, but it's just a stunning village, and it is very much like St Mary Mead. So I love that setting of Miss Marple. Of course, the other thing is she is actually Agatha Christie was an apothecary's assistant, so there was often the poison element to a lot of the murders, and really nice explanations of how things worked. And I guess the final thing is that she was a really strong female character, working within the constraints of what society expected of her as a woman. And actually she used those negative stereotypes to her advantage, because she was often overlooked, and she could say stuff and ask stuff and just be listening and observing without raising any alarm. She used that to her advantage. So I think that's very powerful. I guess the final thing is the fact that she used much of her deduction was based on observing and understanding human behaviour and what drives individuals. That was often how she actually solved the murders. So of course that then fits with my behaviour change stuff.
Wow.
I have to say, Debbie, you worried me when you mentioned it, but you've rescued it now after that explanation. You've hung so much on that. So is it Miss Marple is a series, isn't it? Or something? There's lots of them. Is there one in particular that we're going to put in the library for you?
Oh no, you're going to make me pick one.
Yeah.
Is there Miss Marple and the Poisoned Pharmacist or something? Or
No.
There's quite a lot of them end in poison, isn't it?
They do, a lot of them. I don't know if I could commit to one.
I think Gimmo's mentioned it on a final ingredient before about Agatha Christie being an apothecary's assistant. It's not just thrown together,
We'd get on, I think, because as well as Top Gun, I'm a massive Agatha Christie fan as well. Although I've always gone more for the Poirot stuff, but that was why I mentioned it on the final ingredient, because she was a apothecary's assistant just after the war. She was bored by it, she hated it, but she then started to get interested in the poisons, and it was that.
Yeah.
So, Debbie, can you be pushed on a particular novel to go into the library with the lead piping and Professor Green?
Do you know what? I think the one that I liked the most, though. Oh, it does. Sorry, yeah. I was reluctant to pick this one because I thought it didn't have an apothecary element in it. So a murder is announced.
Oh, right.
It has like shooting and stuff in it, which is obviously not poison, but it's all
Don't
about.
spoil it.
Oh yeah. Okay,
Go on.
sorry. Yeah,
No,
no,
go
no,
on.
no. I
People
won't.
have read
No,
it.
you're right. I won't.
Okay, so A Murder is Announced, Miss Marple by Agatha Christie. That will go into the Aural Apothecary Library.
I'm going to read that one.
They're very classical choices, your three choices, aren't they?
Yeah, very good. Although you did go for the international naming of furosemide. It was furosemide when you were a student like me. Well, all of us, yeah.
Well, it's Brexit and all that, isn't it?
Yeah. Right, excellent. 3 really well thought out choices there, Debbie. Wouldn't have expected anything less from you, so that's excellent. So, on to the micro discussion for this week. And for the avid listener, you'll know that we talked quite a lot last week about shared decision making. And because we knew that Debbie was coming on, and with her behavioural medicine and psychology background, we thought we'd keep it up. But rather than the highbrow article that we had last week with Waz, that maybe we should have done with Debbie, we've taken it down to something quite different. But this is very much at a patient level. So I think they've just come out, and it's a suite of decision aids from the NHS about very common things that lots of patients might need to think about. So, for example, there's this one about knee osteoarthritis, as Jamie said, or there's one about should I have a hip replacement, or should I have a cataract operation? So they're quite common things, and they're 8 to 10 pages long, and it's a decision aid for the patient to read and to be informed, and then to make decisions about what their thoughts are as to what their values and preferences are, and then all the options that exist, the treatment options, and then what's important to them to try and help them to make a better decision, I suppose is what I would say at the end of the day. So, who would like to kick us off on these?
Well, I'll start because it took me back to the late 90s running pre-admission clinics in the hospital and running anti-coag clinics in primary care. So my week then was 2.5 days hospital running the pre-admission clinics, 1.5 day in primary care doing meds review and anti-coag, and 1 day for the health authority. And so back in the day, so I was doing pre-admission for all the people coming in for their hips and knees. You know, they'd come in a week, and so this was fairly new stuff back in then, in the mid to late 90s. People would come in a week before or 2 weeks before surgery, and a pharmacist would be as part of the team reviewing their meds and discussing it with them. And so some of these things would have been useful. There's an awful lot of information in them, isn't there? And so when I looked at a few of them, is page 5 of the AF one, all of a sudden is numbers coming into
irregular heartbeat.
Yeah, numbers coming into play, and then page 6 sort of swamped me slightly. Overwhelmed me, page 6 did. So definitely a step in the right direction. I quite enjoyed them. It reminded me actually of Theo Rayner's work from Leeds. Remember him and his user testing? So I remember we used to produce stuff, and we didn't used to, back in the day, we used to produce stuff and not check it with anybody. And then when you'd ask somebody, well, what's your message? You'd be lucky if they actually had a message that they could tell you. And then if you said, well, actually, there's 5 messages in there, when we use a test, people would see 2 of them. And so that's where I'm assuming we're much further down the track on this type of stuff now, and that these will have been out for rigorous review. Remind me where they were from, NHS England and the Winton?
Yeah, so they were funded by NHS England, but I think this is worth saying is that there's an organisation, and we have considered getting a guest on from here, and I think we should, called the Winton Centre for Risk and Evidence Communication. There's a guy called Professor David Spiegelhofer is out of there, and he's a statistician, but it's all about how do you turn complex things into a simple way of explaining it. So, yeah, that's who I think did a lot of the work on these. Debbie, what did you think of these?
So I guess when I looked at these, the first thing that came into my head is because I'm doing a practitioner behaviour change intervention about implementing shared decision-making in an ICS. So we surveyed practitioners across hospital, primary care, and said, this is happening. You're going to have to make sure that shared decision-making is routine. It's routinely embedded into all your conversations. What are your thoughts about what the barriers and enablers are going to be to you doing that? And one of the things that came through was actually time, which you expect people to say. But when we really unpacked it, it's not about time. It's about having the resources to be able to signpost to patients. So they didn't. So they were really open, actually, lack of confidence in actually navigating a shared decision-making consultation, and then embedding into that the required information to then support the patient to be able to go away and make an informed decision. And so these decision aids actually tick 2 boxes, because one, it's if we can then embed them into the computer system so that it's really easy for them to find, that's quick, and it's a prompt as well. So that was the other thing they said they need. We'll forget. We're still in bad habits if we need something to prompt us. So I can see how embedding these could be a nice prompt. It's also information that allows the patient to then go away, speak to carers, reflect on it, rather than having to make hasty decisions. And we were talking earlier about having the twins, and I remember, and recently actually I lost my father. And, I'm a reasonably intelligent person. I have a clinical background. I would walk out of consultations. I'm like, I haven't a clue what the heck I was saying. Or I could remember about 10% of what was said to me. I actually remember getting really uppity one day and saying, actually, I think I was at the end of my tether, and I said, so was it that you wanted to talk at me, or did you want my thoughts? I actually said that. I can't believe I said that to a geriatrician. Did you want to just talk at me, or would you like my thoughts on how we're... So I really see that, real time expecting people to make decisions and process is completely unreasonable. And I get what you're saying. I think it was Gimmo, you were saying that it looks really complex. Was it you, Jamie, that these are really complex? But I guess if someone's got the time to go away and they can even Google stuff, maybe, it is fit for purpose.
I was just reflecting on what Jamie said and what you said is I just wondered if, I thought these were brilliant on the one hand, but I just wondered if they're trying to do too much in one document. And so, because on the one hand, they're brilliant, what Jamie was describing, that pre-visit sort of conversation piece, and then on the other hand there was the quite overwhelming bit about trying to convey the risks using some very good tools that are evidence-based. But I felt if that was me, I'd want someone there with me talking me through them rather than doing it. So I think it's fantastic. I just wondered if it was doing a little bit too much, but I tried it as a punter, so I've got a bit of osteoarthritis in my knee. And not that I like to moan about it at every given opportunity, which I do. One of the things that's frustrated me with having osteoarthritis, and I thought this would help me to bring it out, is it's not the pain that bothers me. It's the fact that I struggle to sleep with it. And I thought, when I read through it, I thought, actually, the way this is worded, it would allow me to present that symptom to the doctor or to whoever in a much better way, whereas often... you rarely get to talk about that because people are so focused on the swelling in the knee or the pain relief, and whereas it's the sleep that's bothering me. And I thought that the way it was worded was very good. And the other thing I thought about was we've touched briefly in the past about what's the company that do online doctors, Babylon, and the growing use of bots and things like this. But I actually thought there's a whole package here that would be fantastic in a bot. If we could send someone a program on an app or something before they came into the doctor. So instead of a printed sheet, this was run through an artificial intelligence. I wonder if it could be quite useful. I don't know. This is where AI, we don't want it to replace doctors and pharmacists and stuff, but as an aid before you came in, you ran through a program like this on your phone. That's when that risk communication could be really handy, because it would be backed up with a bot telling you what's what.
I think, I'm very happy to give discredit where discredit's due, but I'm also like to give credit where credit's due. And I think these are excellent. I think they're easy to read. Okay, there's been a lot of work gone into these. I've seen lots of decision aids in the past. I'm a big fan of them. These are some of the clearest that I've seen, although they're quite long. As we've just said, some of these things are quite complicated. And again, just a study of one person. I sent it to my mother-in-law about one of these. And the funny thing is that we've been having this conversation about 6 months ago, and I said to them, why don't you write down what it is that you want and then email it to your consultant and say to them that when I come to my next appointment, you would like them to answer all of the questions. So that is exactly what this is. And my biggest fear with all these things that are great, and you've already mentioned it, Debbie, is they'll just sit there and not enough people will know about them. Not enough people will use them. I sent them out immediately to all clinicians in my practices last week. I had an email straight back from one of the senior partners at one of the other practices saying, these are fab. I've just sent it out to a patient that I've just seen who started talking about whether or not he wants to have a hip operation or not. So if we can get them out there and they can be used, because it, as you said, it allows the patient to think about maybe not just thinking about the pain, Gimo, but, other things. You're getting the person's point of view so that you can then help them to make a better decision, because values and preferences says that some people will decide not to go for an operation because of this, and others will decide that they will. And so I think that they're ace.
What percentage of your population can read STC?
Well, of course, that is an issue, of course. And maybe they're going to come out in simpler form, I don't know. But on what's in front of me, for somebody who's got enough intelligence or a reading age to read it, I think they're quite good. I think they're quite plain English. I mean, I'm happy to be knocked down on that, but I think they are.
No, it's not a question of knocking you down. It's just, Debbie, we overestimate health literacy out there, don't we? Is that a fair comment?
I did do a project, so from community pharmacy, evaluating the population with adequate health literacy, and I can't remember what the statistic was now, but it was alarmingly low. I think it was something like 40% have adequate health literacy, and so obviously the 60%. This wouldn't be quite right for. But I agree with Steve. These are baby steps that are in the right direction. And just because we may be creating a little bit of inequity initially doesn't mean we shouldn't do it at all. And once they become embedded, we can then start to produce them in different languages. We can start to produce them in different formats, and we can really refine them. So I think this is fabulous.
And that's the key, isn't it? Because I think it's making these part of normal practice, isn't it? We should begin to expect this as patients now, is that we take part in that preparation before we go to appointment instead of turning. And I think that's the behavioural change there, isn't it?
Yeah. And the clinicians would love it too, because you've thought about it in advance, and then the whole time is spent just dealing with. We've already got your views from some of this stuff that you filled out from the aid. Go on, James.
I just, at the end of the osteoarthritis one, it's quite interesting. It says, where did we get our numbers from? And then it details then some of the research that perhaps we'd be more familiar with. But you can just see things slowly coming together, admittedly. Benefits and risks of non-surgical treatments. Look, benefits of surgery is from NHS PROMS data.
Do you want to explain that?
Yeah, patient-reported outcomes or patient-reported measures.
Which is what Debbie was talking about earlier in her study?
Well, I don't know. We had this conversation last time, didn't we? So patient-orientated outcomes are slightly different.
Oh, I get confused with these sometimes.
Slightly different to the PROMS, which is a patient-reported outcome measures, aren't they? But you can just see the system is collecting these things, and so it is great that it's coming back through to be produced in this. I'm just a little bit, and I appreciate what Debbie says. It's a massive step in the right direction, but I still think, wow, it's still a lot of information, and it's going to require an awful lot of time.
Well, we've spoken highly of NHS England twice tonight. We talked to them about funding the PI's doing, and I know that they funded these. And I think they were done by others, but they have been funded by the NHS England. So, and I know Jonathan Underhill will be harsh on me on Twitter when I say this, but unfortunately, although one of them is about this irregular heartbeat called atrial fibrillation, it's about how to control the rhythm. Whereas the more important thing is probably how do you want to thin the blood to reduce the risk of a stroke? And unfortunately, NICE had such a decision aid, but is now currently being withdrawn. And I'm dealing with that every day, multiple patients every day, about anticoagulation in people with an irregular heartbeat. So we need one of these for that as soon as possible, please.
Talking about being harsh on Twitter, Tony Copperfield, the primary care Scream guy, he was on Twitter this week talking about shared decision making, that he's been a GP for 34 years and that he's been practicing shared decision making that whole time. And I think and I'm paraphrasing now, I think his whole bent was, why on earth would he need to go on shared decision making training? because he's been a GP for 34 years or 35 years.
This is the controversial guy that writes in the Pulse, but it's actually quite funny sometimes.
Yes.
I have to say, I thought that's the sort of response that we were going to get when we sent the survey out, to consultants, to general GPs across this ICS. And one of the statements is, I am not confident to implement shared decision making, and I thought it was going to be completely, outraged. I was really impressed with what proportions said actually I'm not confident.
I think the reply to that little exchange on Twitter was, I think that's the point, because when we ask patients, do you consider yourself to have been involved in the decision making? There's a mismatch between what our clinicians are saying. Yes, I employed shared decision making, and that doesn't seem to be landing quite rightly. There's a big mismatch between what the patient is experiencing.
Because I got what I wanted.
Just as you did with your consultation with your care of the elderly consultant, Debbie. Okay. A big thank you to Debbie for joining us on the Aural Apothecary and for sharing her stories, her marooned medicine for the formulary, her career anthem, and her book for the Aural Apothecary Library. Coming up next time, we'll be joined by Dave Murdoch. Dave is an advanced paramedic practitioner with over 28 years of experience. He's worked in a wide variety of pre-hospital settings, including ambulances, cars, helicopters, as well as urgent care centres, emergency departments, and general practice surgeries. We look forward to welcoming Dave next time on the Aural Apothecary. You can contact us via Twitter at Aural Apothecary. We're on LinkedIn. You can email us at auralapothecarypod@gmail.com. Over to Gimmo now for the final ingredient.
Can I just say, James, as well as getting in touch or following us on Twitter, a reminder to rate us on Spotify or Apple or whoever you get your podcasts from. Give us a rating, leave us a review. It's all good feedback. And thanks, Debbie, for that. It was great. I'm going to go and read an Agatha Christie book this very evening, I think.
Thanks for having me.
So the final ingredient. So what do Victor Hugo, Margaret Atwood, St. Augustine of Hippo, and Douglas Adams have in common? Well, they're all famous procrastinators. So I'm sure we all lay claim to a bit of procrastination, but chronic procrastination can have an impact on people's health, well-being, career. It can result in stress, anxiety, and even shame. Sufferers have been found to have less job security and more limited career progression, and it can cause insomnia and headaches and bring on heart-related health problems. So this week's final ingredient comes from The Guardian, where a Durham University professor and world-leading authority on procrastination, Infucius Sirios, apologies if I've said her name wrong, is bidding to help after 2 decades of studying procrastination and hearing many heartbreaking stories. She's now published a research-based self-help guide offering insights and practical strategies to deal with it. An estimated 25% of people frequently procrastinate. I mean, it's never been a good thing, despite some researchers arguing the benefits of positive procrastination. At its core is an irrational and emotional act, Sirius says. Procrastination is a form of emotion regulation where sufferers avoid a task that might spark negative emotions by disengaging with it or putting it off. She says harsh judgment wasn't the solution, and telling procrastinations that they're lazy or that they need to work on their organisation or time management is also not the answer. So she's written this self-help book, given evidence-based ideas to help. What are those ideas? Well, I don't know, to be honest. I haven't got around to reading it.
This was a 3 Apothecaries production. Sound engineer Jimbo Slough. Original music Jamie Brewster. Artwork by David Baker.
Thanks for listening to the Aural Apothecary podcast. Warning, always enjoy with an alcoholic drink, especially if operating machinery.
This episode of the Aural Apothecary is sponsored by onelesspill.com, a medicines optimization consultancy.